My pa obtained a shotgun 2 days and 2 weeks shy of my 9th birthday. It's part of a horse trade with Farmer Pickett. Considering what Pickett did to his family without the gun, it would have served both families better with the original owner. But I have come to believe quite resolutely in the dominance of fate, and that God is not only cruel, but often hungry. I lay in my bed 2 nights later, sweating through my nightgown in the oppressive heat. A cricket had migrated into some corner of my room, and I had been resigned to fixate on its rhythmic melody to lull me to sleep. Feeling the urge to urinate, I prepared myself to rise from my bed. I turned away from the window toward my bedroom door and saw something that made me lay very still, in the way a field mouse will stiffen, like a small stone, at the sight of a barn cat. Ma stood in the doorway, her unclothed form dimly silhouetted by the moonlight pouring in from the south side of the house. Her long brown hair was unpinned, hanging unkempt across her shoulders and back, and in the dark, I could make out Pickett's shotgun, clutched across her belly with both hands. She shook fervently with strange tremors, but stood in place. The shotgun made tiny clicking noises as it was jostled in her hands, and her shaking increased. I, like the rodent, held my breath and waited. Ma stood upon the threshold for at least a full minute. I could not see her eyes, but somehow knew they were watching my paralyzed figure with malicious eagerness, searching for any sign of wakefulness. Worse, the cricket had gone silent, and I waited in terror for the slightest offense of a creak in bed, or falling bead of sweat to initiate some act of unfathomable violence upon my person. The head of the thing that looked like my ma rotated an inch, then halted like a rusty weather vane. I was certain she had noticed somehow, and I waited with dread for whatever was to come next. Just as my lungs and bladder would void themselves in angry unison, the shape abruptly turned and walked away. I experienced a moment of exquisite relief, breathing in great silent gulps of air, followed by the realization that I was far from safe and needed to decide whether to move or continue to play possum. Aiming for half measures, I carefully sat up and swung my legs over, then froze in mid-movement at the sound of the gun bellowing from my parents' room. The soft shuffle of my ma's feet resumed, her steps suddenly halted and purposeless. Another closer shot filled the hallway with sound and light. A woman I did not recognize anymore staggered into view, her one remaining eye wandering across the room until it locked on me. With half a mouth, it attempted to speak.
"What are you doing up at this ungodly hour, child?"
The shape collapsed in a boneless heap in my doorway, remains of Ma's brains and blood pouring out in rivulets on the floor. Somewhere, far away, I felt my body relieve itself as I sat, numbly watching the blood inch toward my toes. The cricket resumed its song. The doc says that dwelling on a memory gives the mind license to embellish. And there are some details of which I am more certain than others in that tale. I am certain that it was my ma who shot my pa, and not an intruder. Though such a heinous act to most would seem unnatural for any Christian woman. Sheriff Riggs, who investigated the matter, agrees with me that my ma was the culprit, as even a man with tracking skills far inferior to his could not think otherwise. I found out Many years later, of course, that Riggs claimed not to have seen a thing so gruesome since he fought the Apache savages down Texas way. At first, I was placed into the care of Preacher Lockheed, but he soon found a more suitable home for me with the Richardsons. I should say, they were very patient regarding my fits and anxieties. One would be hard-pressed to find a family so long-suffering. For a long while, I woke everyone up in the house by screaming in the middle of the night, convinced that some conglomeration of shadows was Ma at my doorway, back from her grave, and finishing what she started. As I matured, my fears did not vanish, but it became easier to distinguish them from reality. That is, until recently. I married Dale Oakfield, a good man of whom I was fond long before either of us were marrying age. We knew each other from his time spent as a ranch hand for the Richardsons. I took no notice of him for some time, and when his intentions became more apparent, I was dismissive, sometimes rude. Eventually he won my confidence and lacked manner to the Richardsons, and I fancied the prospect of a mostly normal, maybe even happy life. Our son, Gregory, he's 4 years old now. I run the general goods store in the center of town, and business has continued to grow since the store was opened. Dale and I joke that Dogwood has come to be nigh on metropolitan. This is not the case, but it is certainly how it feels to those of us who remember it as a scant few buildings on a road. Last Wednesday morning, I heard the bell chime and someone step into the store as I was taking inventory in the back. I said, "1 moment, please," as I put down my papers and sorted them away. The floor creaked as the person walked around the store. I approached the desk and asked how I could help them, before realizing I'd announced myself to an empty room. I have a shelf in my store that's higher than my collar, and I saw no heads nor hats poking out from behind them. I patrolled the area to no avail. I ended the day believing the failure to hear an exit to be a malfunction on the part of my door chime. The following morning, I was told by a boy who was sweeping the footsteps of the saloon that there had been someone standing before my shop, but had left shortly after sunup. I inspected the chime the best I could and tightened the screws that held it in position, hoping that there'd be no further issue after that. That day went off without a hitch, but I elected to postpone the items on my itinerary that would have required that I leave the desk for the back room. I despise firearms, but I keep a knife close by, under the desk. Over the years, I've whittled my paranoia into caution. At the end of the day, I locked the door, lit a candle, and finished my work in the back room, secure in the knowledge that I would be undisturbed by strangers of unknown intent. I was working well past my usual, but Dave and Gregory had grown used to this. Even when I was home, I rarely slept. The town was quiet, save for the activity from the saloon's patrons and pianist. Emerging from my office, I dusted myself off and stretched, recovering from the hunched-over posture that I have the habit of taking while I focus. As I stretched my head to the side, I saw that there was someone outside my shop. I told them to return in the morning. It was too dark to identify them proper, but there was a familiarity to their shape that I couldn't quite place in my mind, one that chilled me and made me feel for the knife under the desk. I told them to leave again, louder, but they still paid no heed. That's when they started banging at the window. I found myself screaming, "Go away!" as loud as I was capable over and over again. My knees gave way and I sank against the wall to the floor, holding the knife. I don't know how many minutes went on like that, with the person outside pounding at my window, but eventually they stopped. And still later, I slowly rose from behind the desk. They had left. I locked the place up and headed for home. As I passed the saloon and the orange glow from its windows and entrance, I briefly pondered asking one of the men to escort me safely to my house. but I didn't want to explain my concerns. The last thing the shop needed was for rumors to spread around that my fits had returned. I strode at a brisk pace to my destination, unable to spurn the thought of an invisible pursuing. By the time my house was in sight, that thought had overpowered all others. I was reluctant to hum or whistle to comfort myself, as I feared any additional noise I made might cover up the sound of footsteps behind me, closing in on me. I tried to convince myself that the feeling was all in my head, and that the person outside my shop was something like a confused old man, or a drunkard, or both. My attempts at self-reassurance were snuffed by my fear like lit candles thrown into a pond. I began reaching for the doorknob 10 yards or so before I could actually reach it, poised to fling it open and shut myself in as quickly as possible. I was definitely hearing frantic footsteps behind me at that point, though I couldn't tell for sure if they were echoes of my own. Just as I gripped the doorknob, behind my head, a voice, female, deep, enraged, said,
"What are you doing up at this ungodly hour, child?"
Then I was inside, my back against the shut door. I stood there trembling from head to feet. Gregory poked his head out from the bedroom and stared at me, wide-eyed and frightened. Dale emerged from our room and approached me, offering raised hands and soft words like a person trying to calm a horse. I realized that I was still holding the knife in my trembling hands and dropped it. As my husband embraced me, I began to sob. I couldn't allow myself to remain like that for long. Angry for conjuring figments to scare myself, and for losing my composure in front of Gregory. I stepped away from my husband and told my son to go back to bed. He replied, "I was in bed before you yelled at me for being up." My thoughts kept me awake despite my best efforts to sleep. What Gregory had said had put two possibilities at odds in my mind, and both were equally terrifying. Either the voice I had heard as I was closing the front door was my own, which made me fear for my sanity, or it was not, which made me fear for my safety. I could not take my eyes from the bedroom doorway for the duration of the night. In the morning, Dale suggested that I take a holiday. He would watch the shop for me while I visited his sister. I know he had been considering what he had witnessed from my behavior the night before. I accepted. His sister Magdalene and her husband had a ranch with 120 acres. It was May, and cottonwood fluff was drifting through the air. The first few nights were difficult for me, mainly in that I kept feeling like there was something that I had forgotten. Some work I left that needs to be done, or that some great tragedy would befall me if I was not alert. Once I adjusted, however, my stay there was truly blissful, and for a while I forgot my troubles. For a week I was able to assure myself that there was no threat to me or anyone around me. A letter arrived addressed to me from Dale. It said that Gregory was sick with a dangerous fever, and that his condition was steadily declining. There was little else that could have so quickly pulled me from Maggie's ranch. When I arrived back in Dogwood, Dale and the doc were standing over my boy. The doc was assessing Gregory. He told me that while he still had a cough, he appeared to be recovering. The day before, Gregory was nearly in the clutches of death, but around the time I left, his symptoms lessened. He had never seen a patient get better so quickly, as though all it took was the proximity of a mother's love. My first day that I was back in the shop, everything proceeded as normal until late afternoon, when a smell of rot appeared. I searched for the offending source for nearly half the day. As I was looking under my counter, I heard the door chime, but no footsteps followed. I raised my head and screamed. A new item was atop the counter. A shotgun covered in filth and what appeared to be old blood. My mouth sucked at the musty air, but my throat would not receive it. For a time, I was that mouse again, waiting for the sting of claw and fang. Then a surprising calm fell upon me. My muscles relaxed, and a great gulp of stale air rushed into my chest, followed by the immediate certainty that I was gonna be ill. I rushed outside for my body to purge itself. Once there was nothing else forthcoming, I felt hollowed. Sheriff Riggs didn't know what to make of it, holding his hat at his side and scratching the back of his head. I waited outside the shop, looking in as he and his deputy examined, then collected the shotgun. The deputy left with a duffel bag, and Riggs stopped to talk with me. He saw the unspoken question in my eyes and said that it wasn't the same one. I asked how he could be so certain, on account of its appearance and mysterious presentation, to which he replied that he buried it, and only he knew where. I told him that he'd best check on it. I do not know if he did check on it, but I know that it wasn't there, though I had gone directly home, and the sheriff and his deputy had gone the opposite direction. It was waiting for me, resting across the arms of the porch rocker. I know now that this is not a dilemma that I can solve peaceably, nor escape. Whosoever finds this letter, know that I ended my life not out of fear, but out of love for my family. I have never, since the day of my parents' deaths, prayed to the Lord for anything. But I pray now that the evil lies within me, as I believe it does, and not within that gun. If it is the latter, I fear that my aim may strike another before me. In the same way, I hope that the whispers I hear as I write are from my husband and son in the other room, trying not to wake me from the rest I told them I needed in pretense to write this letter. And not, instead, whispers from my true family.